Welcome, everyone, friends from around the world. This is a special event for us, the 38th annual meeting for the Global Network. I remember the days when we used to meet in person. Those were pretty great. But time and space brings us together virtually. So tonight, we're going to see a short presentation from Dave Webb. He'll show us a video about space. KJ No is he's the speaker, so we'll hear a lot from KJ tonight. We'll have an opportunity to ask KJ some questions. And just before the end of the evening, Bruce will talk a little bit about Keep Space for Peace Week. So we'll start by introducing Dave Webb. Dave Webb is the convener for the Global Network. He comes to us from Leeds, England, and Dave is kind of the soul of the organization, I might say. So Dave, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much. I'll just share my screen. Is that okay? Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Right. I have a fair bit to say, so I'll speed along. Here we are. Yeah, the US military preparations for war continue on land, at sea, in the air, and in space. The US has repeatedly stated its intent to go to war with China, and the UK, France, Japan, and others are joining in. Global military spending reached $2.7 trillion last year, with the US responsible for 37% of the total. Next came China, Russia, Germany, and India. And President Trump, after months of campaigning for the Nobel Peace Prize, now wants to change the Department of Defense into the Department of War. Perhaps that's a better description. But wars cannot be fought these days without significant support from space systems. And so the US Space Force's Space Operations Command, which has a headquarters at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs, is also being renamed as Combat Forces Command. Things don't look good for the future unless we can somehow change course soon. Spending on space programs is also increasing, with the US leading here too, spending almost $80 billion on space last year, an increase of 9% on 2023 and 4 times as much as China. And the US also launches more objects into space than any other country, with 2,263 launches in 2024, almost 80% of the world total. Even so, there are continual reminders of how China and Russia are planning to dominate space and deny its use to others, when the US sees this as the role of Space Command, as its 1997 vision for 2020 clearly states. Its aim is to obtain military dominance on land, at sea, in the air, in space, and of information, the full spectrum. The US Space Force was formed in 2019 by Donald Trump to ensure that the US achieves space superiority and maintains control of space. The use of space and satellites in the Ukraine war has been the subject of a number of studies to help build future strategies. The military sees space as another battleground, and the various orbital regions are to be controlled and their use denied to others. The recent Space Force publication, Warfighting, a Framework for Planners, outlines how it sees space superiority as a necessary condition for military success. It outlines the principles and strategies for achieving space superiority in military operations and includes the strategic framework for space warfare. Space superiority is seen as essential for military operations across all domains and is defined as having a degree of control that allows forces to operate at a time and place of their choosing without prohibitive interference from space or counter-space threats, while also denying the same to an adversary. It enables effective power projection. The document describes how space superiority will be gained and maintained by counter-space operations to disrupt, degrade, deny, or destroy enemy capabilities. And these operations will involve linking military, orbital, and ground-based resources. Actions are also outlined for defending satellites against attacks by using escorts, counterattacks, and denying the enemy the ability to target. Counter-space operations are seen as essential to ensuring military space operations. Vision for 2020 is becoming reality, and Space Force is developing projects to provide the ability to identify and respond rapidly to potential threats in orbit through the program called Tactical Responsive Space. One of these projects is an orbital carrier that could deliver maneuverable space vehicles to the front line and have them ready to respond to future threats. This is how it's seen by the media, but it actually looks more like this. And it's being developed by Gravitix and supported by $60 million worth of funding. Also part of this program is space domain awareness, which involves the detection, tracking, and categorizing of all activity within the space domain. Data is collected from satellites and ground-based telescopes and radars and combined with intelligence sources to produce a picture of the space environment. These systems not only monitor the activities of others in space, but they can also provide data for the targeting of anti-satellite systems, and therefore they play an important role in the space battle management. Space Force also wants the ability to place satellites into orbit rapidly. And in 2023, launch and ground systems for Firefly Aerospace's Victus Nox mission were prepared in months rather than years, and the payload launched within 24 hours notice rather than within weeks. Space warfighting also includes rendezvous and proximity operations for the purposes of defense, offense, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, collection, sustainment, training, research and development, or to fulfill other missions. And projects to develop maneuverable spacecraft include Rocket Lab's Victus Haze and Impulse Space missions Victus Sergo and Victus Salo to test how prepositioned space assets can be moved in space. And then there's President Trump's Golden Dome project, supposedly to protect the US against any ballistic, hypersonic and cruise missile attack or conventional or nuclear warheads from anywhere on Earth. You can read our statement on the Global Dome on our website, and you can add your signature to it by contacting us. Long-range ballistic missiles follow a three-phase trajectory as they approach a target. The boost phase projects the missile into a predictable ballistic path to the mid-course phase above the Earth's atmosphere and the terminal phase when the missile descends to its target. Regarding hypersonic weapons, there are two types: glide weapons, initially boosted by a rocket, and cruise missiles powered by scramjets. Both have the potential to maneuver along their path to the target to evade radar detection and interception. Some of the components of Ronald Reagan's original Strategic Defense Initiative missile defense system have actually been developed, and currently a total of around 44 ground-based interceptors are stationed in Alaska and California, with a third site scheduled in Michigan, Ohio, or New York by 2030. They were developed for mid and terminal phase interception, but they're only a small number, and they would be ineffective against a large-scale attack involving hundreds or even thousands of missiles. Also, hypersonic missiles travel at Mach 5, too fast to be intercepted in this way. The space-based interceptors shown here were not developed, although they are planned for the Golden Dome in order to achieve boost phase interception. Existing and developing networks of satellites for early warning, tracking, and targeting of ballistic and hypersonic missiles will form a major part of the Golden Dome's space-based sensor system. Other existing systems, including Lockheed Martin's DARD and Aegis Ashore systems, and Raytheon's Patriot surface-to-air missiles, are deployed against short and medium-range ballistic missiles, but would be ineffective against long-range missiles. Trump has said that the total cost of the system would be $175 billion, and it would be implemented during the next 4 years. However, more realistic estimates are that it will cost much more, well over $500 billion, or even to trillions of dollars, and never be fully implemented, just like Reagan's SDI. According to the American Physical Society, the US has already spent over $500 billion on missile defense, and Golden Dome would be a colossal waste of resources. But the aerospace corporations are already looking for their share of this boondoggle. Although the Golden Dome project is effectively an integration of existing and developing systems, the inclusion of space-based interceptors is causing problems for global security. They would be the first weapons to be stationed in space, and their deployment would further escalate international tensions and accelerate the space arms race. Russia and China have issued a statement warning about upsetting stability and condemning the US for Golden Dome's plan to place SBIs in orbit. Also, in 2019, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution on no first placement of weapons in outer space, based on an updated draft treaty introduced by China and Russia in 2008. While not a binding treaty, the resolution has broad international support and encourages nations to make political commitments to not be the first to place weapons in orbit. It was, of course, opposed by the US and the European Union.
Dave, it's
There's
been
also,
10 minutes, but finish.
oh, okay,
Yeah, keep going.
I've only got a few left to go. There's also a question of effectiveness. It's estimated that around 1,900 space-based interceptors would be required in low Earth orbit to enable boost phase interception and for continuous global coverage. And even then, they could only be used against a small number of missile launches at any one time. Also, no missile defense system is totally effective. And Israel's Iron Dome, widely believed to be effective in intercepting short-range missiles fired by Hamas, it cannot cope with large numbers, and many have got through. It's also swamped and tricked by a barrage of missiles and drones from Iran. But with so much money to be made, aerospace companies will want these systems to be seen to work. 20 years ago, GN board member Subrata Ghoshroy accused the Government Accountability Office of covering up incidents of skewing and falsifying data by two major missile defense contractors. Mike Schroer, a former engineer who worked on missile defense systems, has warned not to trust industry claims about how often they intercept missiles in test scenarios. He said that when he worked on SDI in 1986, it was common knowledge in the business that the target was enhanced to make the intercept successful. So the Golden Dome will give billions of dollars to aerospace companies, money that could be used for education, healthcare, and the environment. And the promised system cannot be delivered in 4 years, and it will never work. That's why the GN is using the Golden Dome as a focus for Keep Space for Peace Week from October the 4th to the 11th this year. As the poster says, is space as a warfighting domain the reality we want to build our future on? Instead of weapons in space for a Golden Dome, we should be leading the effort to ban weapons and warfare in space. Please join us. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you. That grounds us all in what we're doing. So it's my pleasure to introduce KJ No. KJ is a journalist, a political analyst, a writer, an educator. He specializes in the geopolitics and the political economy of the Asia Pacific region. KJ is a member of Veterans for Peace, the co-founder of Pivot to Peace, and the co-host of the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. Welcome, KJ. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you. I'm going to start sharing my slide. And if you can confirm that that is visible for you.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. And I'm also going to see if I can get it to be full screen.
Full screen.
Okay.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
thank you, everybody. I'm very honored to be here. I want to thank Bruce for the invitation. I've actually known Bruce for over a decade, since his work opposing the military base on Kangjong Village on Jeju Island. And that struggle still continues, and it's still relevant, as I'll get to very shortly. But mostly I want to express my deep and tremendous respect for the work of Bruce and Dave and Carl and other members of Global Network for Peace. I think that if we survive as a species, and when the annals of this period are written, there will be a large section dedicated to individuals like Bruce and the Global Network for Peace, for their prodigious, courageous, uncompromising, and heroic organizing and activism. So I'm very honored to join you today and to contribute perhaps just a little to the work that you're already doing. So as has already been pointed out, space is important because in military doctrine, space is the ultimate higher ground. Militaries always seek the higher ground, and space is the highest of higher ground. This goes back to the idea that in war, the sea controls the land, air controls both sea and land, and space is designed to control air, sea, and land. So these are very, very important issues that we will be dealing with today. But actually, I want to start out slightly obliquely with the Nanjing massacre. The reason why I bring this up is that China has just very recently celebrated its 80th anniversary of its success over Japanese fascism. This is the war to resist fascism, the war that defeated Japan as a global empire. And many of you may have already seen the large military parade, but that military parade is important because a few things that you may or may not have noticed is that at the very end, doves were released. So this is really a demonstration of both their capacity to defend themselves, but also their desire for peace. The street that the Chinese troops were marching on is actually called the Long Peace Street, Chang'an Jie. And they met, of course, under the gate of heavenly peace. So there's a deep and profound yearning for peace in the Chinese psyche, and I believe in the peoples of the world, certainly of the people in Asia. And I think that it's also important for us to remember that China lost 35 million people in World War II, and it didn't start in 1939 or 1941. For them, it started in 1931. And in particular, one of the key markers is the Nanjing Massacre. Those of you may already know that over a 6-week period, the Japanese killed 300,000 Chinese who were captured in a city and then slaughtered, very much in the way that we are seeing the people of Gaza being slaughtered on a daily basis. This is an image you can see. It's a partially excavated mass grave in the image. A recent film was released called Dead to Rights. It will not show for very long in the United States, if at all, but if you have the opportunity, I invite you to go and see it. So these are some more images of the Nanjing massacre. I tried to stay away from the images that were too graphic or gruesome. It would essentially get us banned from YouTube. But the image on the right is a young woman who has been gang raped, and she is in a state of catatonia. Of course, the people on Jeju Island are very, very aware of the Nanjing massacre because, as very few people may understand, it actually started from Jeju Island, starting August of 1937. Planes were launched bombing Shanghai and then Nanjing and the entire strip between Shanghai and Nanjing. So it was initiated, the platform of attack was from Jeju Island, and then it turned into this horrendous genocidal massacre. And of course, the good people on Jeju Island have, in their own way, tried to commemorate this by turning the airfield, Ataru, into an art installation. And of course, this is part of the rationale why it is so important to prevent military bases around the world. As we know, and as Bruce and I know, there's been a very, very powerful and long-standing anti-base struggle on Kangjong Village. Although the base has been built, the struggle continues because of the way in which these bases will continue to be militarized and used. And all of this is to say that we are preparing for global war. As it currently looks like a three-course meal with China as the main dish, Russia as the appetizer, and I think currently the neocons are trying to decide whether they want Iran as a salad or as a dessert. But this is the plan. It is literally a three-course meal that they're preparing. And of course, it ties to geostrategic theories, Mackinder's theory, the defense planning guidance, the national defense strategy, etc. Now, I'm going to do a slight diversion to signal detection theory, which essentially says that when you're trying to figure things out, the signals that something is happening and the false information, the noise, are often intermingled. And so sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on. If your selection criteria for signal is too sensitive, that is, you move it to the right, then you're going to get false alarms. You're going to interpret harmless signals as dangerous, as true signals of war. And then, this moves into, for example, conspiracy theory, etc. On the other hand, and this is the other danger, if you are too optimistic and you move your criteria too far to the right so that you avoid all noise, you're actually going to miss some real signals of war. And these are the people who are Pollyannish or who have their head in the sand. We want to avoid this as well. So we want to be as clear-headed as possible in our discernment. And what I say is that we have to watch for three signals as we look out for war. And these are actually stages of war. The first is information warfare. The second is the preparation of the theater or the staging of the theater. And the third is provocation or casus belli. You can see this happening right now, for example, around Venezuela. We saw this with Iran. We have seen this on a constant multi-year basis with China. So the first stage is information war. This is the subkinetic dimension of war. It really has to do with manufacturing consent, that is, demonizing the other and threat mongering and creating the mental consent for war. And you can tell that we're getting closer to war as the intensity of that information war increases and the volume and the coordination of that increases, especially in mainstream media and in the social media platforms. And the third indication of this is the sheer absurdity of the information war, of the propaganda. The farther you are away from truth, the closer you are to war. watch out for that absurdity. If you're getting contradictory messages, if you're hearing things that are completely out of whack, then that signals that the information war is reaching a crescendo. John Gottman is a psychotherapist. He spoke about the four horsemen. He said that you could predict the end of a relationship in 15 minutes by looking out for these four horsemen. I don't know how accurate his data is, but it's an interesting framework. He says that within 15 minutes, you can tell whether a couple is headed for divorce. And this is similar. You can see the same types of dynamics between countries as well. When you see massive criticism, i.e. demonization, if you see massive contempt for the other based on white supremacy, Western supremacy, racism, and then you see defensive responses from the counterparty, which leads to an escalating security dilemma, and then you see disengagement or withdrawal or decoupling. Very similar to interpersonal dynamic, these signal, very, very dangerous, a very dangerous situation. The second signal is when the theater is being shaped for war. And you can see this in the logistics. The person responsible for US airlift logistics, General Minihan, said that we would go to war in 2025. We're against China. We're currently in 2025. Admiral Davidson said 2027. It seems to be more likely that it's 2027, but the question is not if we will go to war, but simply when. We can also see pre-positioning of stocks, ammunition, weaponry, fuel. We can see the escalating armaments and the weaponry. We can see the intensity of the war games and exercises. For example, in Korea, they had 275 days of war games, including 20 nuclear bombing exercises, and including live fire exercises that resulted in damage to over 160 houses. That's the level of intensity of these war games. And then we can also see the alliances that have been built over the past decade, that is Quad, NATO, JAFAS, etc. There were other signals last year. South Korea nearly had a military coup. And that is very, very important because this military coup was likely involved a provocation of North Korea. The plan of the military coup, at this point, we're about 99% certain, was predicated on a provocation with North Korea. And if North Korea and South Korea had broken out into open conflict, that would have not only justified military dictatorship, but it would have handed South Korea's control, OPCON, of its 500,000 troops plus 3.1 million reserve troops over to the United States, because the US has operational control over all of South Korea's troops. This was foreshadowed by an article in 38 North, a very, very strange article that said that North Korea will go to war, has no choice but to go to war because it has run out of options. We now know that that accusation was actually a confession. Clearly, the US was seeking to provoke war against North Korea. We just recently saw Taiwan's attempted legislative coup. That was also an attempt to bring about a near dictatorial situation in Taiwan, because Taiwan is the other powder keg or the provocation that they will use to start war. We currently see color revolutions and chaos all around the BRICS countries and the Belt and Road, in a belt surrounding China. And then, of course, we see the unbridled aggression, war, genocides around the world, in Europe, in West Asia, Iran, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. I believe that we are already in World War III. Just another data point, Pete Hegseth has declared that Japan and US are constituting a joint force headquarters in Japan. Now, anytime the US talks about a joint command, that simply means US command. In other words, as Hegseth said, Japan would be on the front lines of any contingency, i.e. war, in the Western Pacific. This strategy has been 4 moves deep. The Obama administration remilitarized Japan And then they transformed it into a military that was expeditionary and that had a joint theater expansion. And then there was the acceleration of the budget. Japan will soon have the world's third largest military budget. And you see the kind of turning of every inch of asphalt in the Pacific into a military launching pad that will be coordinated with space assets and air assets. And then there's the Koreanization, which is essentially to take over Japan's military, the way that the US has control over South Korea's military. So this is not, routine boilerplate alliance solidarity. It really is a change in force posture. And then the other signal, of course, is war exercises. As these war exercises become more and more intense, we see the increase in scale, in scope. As I said, Korea, they had 20 strategic nuclear bombing runs and 275 days of exercises. That is unheard of, extraordinary. They recently had a live fire bombing accident. This is what you get when you conduct war exercises on a tempo, pace, and intensity approaching real war. You are going to get friendly fire incidents. And of course, all of this signals that the US is deeply, deeply committed to war. They were also doing last year exercises in taking prisoner of war transfer. That's a granularity of military exercises that I've never heard of in my life. And so then the third dimension, information war, preparing the theater, the third dimension or the third stage is provocations. So we see the constant baiting for war in the Taiwan Strait, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, and also on the Korean Peninsula. It's as if they were constantly driving into the paint, as in basketball, and trying to draw the foul, which will then they use as a casus belli and try and get the entire everybody on the bleachers to come down and start fighting. These plans go back a long way. They go back to the 1992 Defense Planning Guidance document, a project for a new American century, the Bush Doctrine, the Obama Doctrine, the Trump Doctrine, the Biden Doctrine, and the Trump Doctrine again. They pivoted seriously in 2008, and the pivot to Asia was declared in 2011. But in 2008, they started planning out the doctrine of war called air-sea battle. Air-sea battle comes from the Soviet-era battle doctrine against the USSR. It used to be called air-land battle. And air-land battle actually is an adaptation by the US of Israeli war doctrine. It's from the Yom Kippur War, essentially rapid, preemptive decapitation and strikes deep inland. It's a very, very aggressive, preemptive form of war. Most of us know air-land battle as shock and awe. That's how we mostly refer to it. But these plans have been building, and they've been building in multiple domains, primarily in the 6 domains of war, air, land, sea, but also in space, the 3 domains of space: cyberspace, information space, and outer space. So information war, as I said, is the first stage. It involves demonization to manufacture consent and to distance the audience from the enemy. And that involves the 4 or 5 Ds, that the enemy is dirty, disgusting, dishonest, and deadly, dangerous, and demonic. Kurt Campbell said that he would unleash he refers to all these wars happening right now as a unified field. And he said that he would unleash a magnificent symphony of death in Asia. This is how they think. Now I'm going to show you a little map. Does anybody know what this map is? You can take a guess. You can write it into the comments if you wish. Okay, I'm just going to give that away. This is a map of NATO countries. These countries in blue are the NATO countries, and the countries in yellow are NATO adjacent or partners of NATO. As you can see, it's essentially what we call the international community, quote unquote, the international community, which isn't international and doesn't really represent the world. Does anybody know what this map is? As you'll notice, it's very, very similar to the previous map, the NATO map. Does anybody want to hazard a guess what this is a map of? And you can see it's a density map. If you said a map of golf courses in the world, you would be absolutely correct. That is to say, the Western ruling colonial powers are also the countries that are the countries of NATO, which are also the countries that have the largest number of golf courses. And the inverse of that map, the exact mirror image, does anybody know what this is a map of? As I said, it's the mirror inverse of the previous image. It is actually countries that recognize Palestine. And this is also countries that have that oppose Nazism, the green countries. Once again, the countries that recognize Palestine and the countries of the global south are the countries that are all connected. And of course, you can see that where you have golf courses, you also have US military bases. In fact, the base density, the golf course density is actually a good proxy for US base or US base presence. This is, of course, the reason for this is that everywhere the US has a large military presence, it builds not only military bases and facilities, but it usually builds a golf course as well. This is the Riverbend Golf Course in Camp Humphreys in Pyeongtaek in Korea. This used to be luscious farming land where thousands, if not tens of thousands, could be fed from the farming agricultural products. And now it serves a few American GIs, officers, on their leisure activities. NATO also has a golf club. They often use American golf clubs. Now, this is a THAAD missile base in Seongju. And if you look at it, it has some strange objects. You might recognize them as sand traps. And that's because this used to be the Lotte Sky Hill Seongju Country Club. In other words, they turned a golf course into a missile base. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment, because the ruling elite, they really, really love their golf courses. If you remember the Trump-Biden debate, presidential debate, they essentially spent half of their time discussing their golf handicaps. So they really, really love their golf courses. But when they start to turn their golf courses into military bases, you know that they're serious about waging war, because they never like to give up anything. The ruling elite doesn't give up anything. So if they're giving up their golf courses, you know they're dead serious about war. They also plan to use nuclear war. We believe, and I think there's very, very good evidence, that the US plan is to use nuclear weapons. And Elbridge Colby, who is number 3 at the Pentagon right now, has spent a decade agitating and militating for the use of nuclear weapons. He wants a seamless continuum between conventional and nuclear weaponry. And all of this, of course, is tied together with space assets. General Paparo has also said that he plans to unleash a hellscape. Now, some people have said, wait, you know, there's a recent leak which says the national defense strategy says that the United States is retrenching and they're going to prioritize the homeland, focus on a kind of local Monroe doctrine rather than go to war against China. This is a leak. We haven't seen the actual document itself. So I caution people to be very wary about this, in particular because when the Pentagon says it prioritizes the homeland over the China threat, you also have to notice that the head of Indo-PACOM, General Paparo, said the homeland is the Pacific. So I don't believe that anything has significantly changed. We have to watch this very carefully. But watch the sequencing. You know, certainly there's a strategic sequencing going on in a division of labor. It's not a retrenchment or a dialing back of war. It's simply sequencing and a division of labor. And I anticipate that there will be war, expanded war, a recurrent war with Iran shortly. As I said, we have to ask a few questions. Is the US really escalating to war with China? I believe that it is. As I said, we have the three signals. They've built out a transnational kill chain, including space assets, including Link 16. They've literally turned on the SIM card in the military death machine. Some people say, well, we can't afford another war. But that misunderstands how the imperial credit card works. The US is the Blanche Dubois of empires. It relies on the kindness or the extortion of strangers. And so there are tremendous contradictions, but war is also the way of overcoming those contradictions. It's the reboot button for an economy that is actually crashing. You know, when your obese relative has cardiac arrest, you pull out the wall defibrillator and you shock them back to life. Well, the wall defibrillator for the capitalist empire is actually war. And we can see this happening. We can see the war subcontractors suckling at the military teat. These are the pigs of Silicon Valley. And we hear the cry everywhere in the think tanks, prepare for industrial war. The United States needs to get onto industrial war footing. So we can ask, why go to war? Well, you know, the Imperial West has had a 500-year free lunch, and they want to maintain the neo-colonial system of unequal exchange, exploitation, and extraction, and they will go to war to enforce and maintain this system. This is why the daggers came out in 2008 when China showed that it was not going to collapse by itself. The West, the ruling imperial elite of the West, they would rather see the end of the world than the end of their power and privilege. And they're perfectly capable of going to war. As I said, they've prepared shock and awe doctrine against China. John Nagel, who's one of the quote unquote deep thinkers of the deep state, he says, the US needs to prepare for 3,000 casualties a day, and that the draft should be brought back in some form. Is there a possibility for peace? I believe so. I believe that we have no choice, that despair is not an option. We have to be optimists of the will, and we have to keep our mind from being occupied. That is the first battle. As I said, there are 6 domains of war, 3 domains of space war, and there's cyberspace, outer space, and mental space or information space. You have to make sure that your minds are not colonized. You turn your bullshit detectors up to 13, and you degauss your mind, you think critically, and you do everything possible to educate, inform, and work together with all good allies to prevent this war. This is the most important moment in human history. We won't get a second chance to stop World War, especially because it looks to go nuclear. This is the last drink of the millennium. The US is like a drunk where the bar is closing. They won't go home. They're spoiling for a fight. Their credit cards have been rejected. They've struck out with everybody, and it's time for them to go home. The bar is closed. The empire is finished. but they will not go home without a fight. And that's what we have to deter. So thank you so much. I will take questions later. Hopefully that was useful.
Thank you so much, KJ. That was brilliant, frankly. So if you can unmute, I'm sorry, take your slides down, we'll be able to see the whole crew and begin to take some questions. But even, I guess if folks will just raise their hand, that would help me. But before we even get started, there was a question raised in the chat. Barbara Laxon asks, what is a color war?
A color revolution is subversion. It's kind of a soft coup, usually done through the support of the NED using local NGOs and subcontractors, and essentially they overthrow a government. It's what we saw in the Orange Revolution. It's what we saw in Ukraine. It is most likely what we are seeing, for example, in Nepal right now. If you see signs in English and young people protesting, and if the protesting turns violent very, very rapidly, and you hear the Western leaders demanding that the leaders step down immediately, and you see a coordinated media campaign in the mainstream media press, you're probably watching a color revolution, which isn't to say that people don't have grievances, legitimate grievances around the world. But when you see that rapid acceleration and the rapid overthrow of a government with the coordination of the media, the Western press, Western politicians, Western diplomatic arm twisting, you're probably seeing a color revolution.
Thank you, KJ. Lisa Savage has her hand raised. Lisa, did you unmute?
I think I did. Can you hear me?
Yep, thanks.
Thank you for that presentation, KJ. It's always really interesting to hear your take on things. So I'm curious to hear how high our bullshit meter should be turned for this one. I'm just going to read a brief quote from Politico this week. Pentagon officials are proposing the department prioritize protecting the homeland, I hate that word, and Western Hemisphere, a striking reversal from the military's years-long mandate to focus on the threat from China. A draft of the newest national defense strategy, which landed on Hegseth's desk last week, places domestic and regional missions above countering adversaries such as Beijing and Moscow. Are we buying this? Have they realized, like, we can't win a war against China or Russia or Iran? Or is this just a fake? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Lisa. And I addressed it very briefly in the slides. I said that when they talk about pivoting to the homeland, General Paparo has said that the homeland includes the Pacific. In other words, China is still the homeland, which they're going to be involved in. That's what I think. Let's wait and see. This escalation to war has been a 15-year process. There's so much momentum in place. And as I said, we see this three-stage process: information war, staging the theater, and provocations constantly ongoing. It's hard to believe that all of that momentum will turn on a dime and then the US is going to, retreat to its own garden. I think that we should be optimists and hope that they have, come to their senses. But there is so much momentum to war that I will not watch what they do, not what they say. Once again, the analogy that I will give you is that the US is like a drug addict. It does not think rationally. And the drug that it is addicted to is power. It's addicted to power, does not want to let go of that power. I remember, a friend that I had, her mother was addicted to opiates, and her grandmother was recovering from cancer surgery, and she stole her grandmother's opiates because she needed to feed her own habit. And eventually the grandmother died. But this is the thing, you know, the addict does not think rationally. They're addicted to power. They don't want to let go of it. They have this unending, unceasing craving for power, and they will throw anything and anyone under the bus in order to meet their needs. So that's my cynical take on it. But let's watch and see when the national security strategy comes out. Read it very carefully, read it hermeneutically, really analyze it, and then most of all, watch the signals. As I said, watch those 3 signals. If you see a diminution, then that's a good sign. It may signal a minor retrenchment, but don't be taken in, because so much of what is going on in global affairs right now is based on deception.
Thank you, KJ. I want to sort of open Dave up to these questions too. And so there's a question in the chat that says this, Dave. I heard Trump had a stroke, and I wonder if that changes anything, if it's true. I don't know. I don't know where that rumor came from.
I don't know. I don't know if it would change much because there's all kinds of people behind Trump. I don't think he makes all the decisions. There's a whole bunch of people that probably are telling him what to do or advising him, so-called. But I haven't heard that. I don't know what that means. Sorry.
So here's a question for KJ. Can you speak more about the outcomes and impacts of the Tianjin meeting with India, Russia, etc.? Also, can you speak more about China's new global governance initiative? This is from
Yes,
Samara.
that's a really good question. The Tianjin meeting is the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. And this was originally called the Shanghai Five. These were 5 countries, China, Russia, and 3 post-Soviet states that got together, and they decided that they were going to create a coalition to prevent color revolutions and subversion and terrorism. Essentially, it's a security it's a security organization, which is very different from the BRICS. The BRICS is a trading consortium, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is all about maintaining sovereignty and security. This is the security arm of the Global South, if you will. Currently, it's expanding. It is a large part of the global population. And the Tianjin Declaration emphasized, once again, security and sovereignty in key domains. First, in the geopolitical domain, but also in the digital domain. This is the understanding that unless you have digital sovereignty, unless you have sovereignty over your information space, you have no sovereignty at all. You'll be overthrown in a color revolution in no time, as we're seeing with many countries right now. So there's a focus on digital sovereignty and building out a new digital infrastructure that is sovereign and impervious to the attacks of the West, the Imperial West. And also, this also ties into certain developments around AI sovereignty as well. There's also a strong dimension of financial sovereignty. So building out SCO Bank, and then also creating the infrastructure, both electronic and financial, for economic and financial sovereignty, so that your countries cannot be overthrown by sanctions or cutting off access to the global financial system. So it was all about security. It was very clear that they made it. And it was also very, very concrete. There's also a dimension around development and trade and education, etc. Those are all present as well. But the key domain was around concrete measures and institutions to ensure sovereignty of these countries. So it's, as the global South arises, it's also making sure that it is more and more secure against the Imperial West, which is trying to overthrow it and undermine it. I think these are positive measures. People confuse the SCO with the BRICS. They're very, very different. As I said, the BRICS is an economic bloc, a trading bloc. The SCO is the real security bloc. And as the SCO strengthens and becomes more and more consolidated, I think that the Global South will be able to resist, will be more able to resist the attacks of the Imperial West. Regarding the Global Governance Initiative, this is very important. China has put forth three international initiatives: Global Development Initiative, Global Civilizational Initiative, and the Global, I'm missing one, but the Global Governance Initiative is, once again, the idea that we can have good governance amongst equals in a win-win multilateral system. It's very close to the ideals of the UN, but which were more observed in the breach than in the observation. But the idea is that we can build out a world and we can put in the kind of institutional structures for a global governance that follows the principles of Bandung, of equality, mutual respect, non-interference, mutual development amongst equals. I think this is a very meaningful initiative, and hopefully it will continue to build out and develop.
Thanks, KJ. We have a couple of questions in the chat, but we have Simri Gomery who wants to ask a question outright. So Simri, can you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, yes, great presentation. Very, very thought-provoking and disturbing. But I had wondered what you would think about AI. I recently read the book about the creation of AI and by the book by Karen Hu. And I'm thinking it's the technological equivalent of the discovery of nuclear weapons. I'm really, really disturbed and worried about AI. What do you think? How do you think this fits in? I think you mentioned that briefly, something about AI, but I didn't understand what you were saying. How do you think that fits into all of this scenario that you're drawing?
It's very, very important. You know, if you look at the tech companies, the tech leaders that are building out the AI in the United States, they see it as the killer app, killer in its most literal sense. They see it as the app that will give the United States the advantage in a war against China and allow it to continue to dominate the planet. That's why the US AI platforms are closed, and China is countering that by sharing open source AI platforms like DeepSeek. They want AI for the people. They want everybody to benefit from AI. And the US wants AI as a kind of an enclosed, weaponized app that they will use to control and destroy and manipulate everybody. We actually see this happening right now. If you think about Gaza, they are using two AI apps. One is called Hapsora, and the other one is Lavender and Where's Daddy, and they're using AI to target. Their AI is being used to accelerate targeting. So they automate the targeting through AI, and then they use another AI program to accelerate the logistics behind the bombing and the kill chain, and then they're just wiping people out. This is why we've had such an extraordinary death rate. It's very similar to what happened during the Holocaust. Remember, the Holocaust itself was facilitated by IBM. We wouldn't have had a Holocaust if IBM hadn't provided the punch cards. Those calculations, those tabulations, without IBM punch cards would have taken years. Instead, they were done in days and weeks, which is what allowed the final solution to be implemented on the scale that it was. So computing and computers have a long, ignominious history of being used as weapons of war. And in particular, the type of AI that we're using, which is called neural networks, they actually derive from older technology called a perceptron built out in the 1950s. In the 1950s, the original perceptron was built precisely for military targeting, to automate targeting. Targeting is complex. You look at a map, you try and figure out what's going on, and then you select that. That's a slow, manual cognitive process. And what they're doing with that, and what the original perceptron was trying to do, was to automate that process, to accelerate it. So yes, right now, the war that we are seeing right now in Gaza, the genocide, is driven by AI, by US and Israeli tech companies, and as well as being supported by, the big US tech firms, Microsoft and Google, and what have you. So it is very, very dangerous. As I said, it is, as you said, and as they themselves have said, it is comparable to nuclear weapons. These are comparable to nuclear weapons. China and other countries have been trying to put some boundaries around the ethical use of AI, but as is the case with all kinds of international conventions trying to rein in dangerous weapons, the US wants nothing to do with it. So we're at a dangerous moment, and you're absolutely right. We have to be very, very careful. AI is currently being integrated into drone warfare and robot warfare, etc. So the escalation and the proliferation of AI-enabled networked warfare is a very real and concrete risk.
Phew. So we have a question from Ken Yee, and then there's Alice Slater and Tamara Lawrence. Go ahead, Ken.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, KJ, for your thought-provoking presentation. I'm a member of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association, as well as the MAPA No War with China group. So, KJ, you mentioned about the Nanjing massacre, and whenever I watch the news now in Gaza, as horrendous as it is, it definitely, myself as an ethnic Chinese, I was born in Hong Kong, grew up in the US. It definitely makes me think of all the atrocities that happened in China during World War II, with the additions of atrocities that I think most of us cannot imagine. Atrocities during World War II, such as contests on beheading people, prisoners, and raping women and disembowering them, and just things that we can't even imagine that happened, which is the reason for the commemoration parade that happened a week and a half ago. So I do have two questions for KJ. One is from the parade. How do you assess the military advancement of China compared to the US? Would you say that it is approaching parity? Or because obviously there has been so many people spinning exactly the implication of that parade, and where does the truth lie? So what's your sense of the military parade? That's the first part. And the second part of the question is the US government going to use that parade as an excuse to escalate military escalation and increase in the military budget, using the Chinese advancement in military hardware as an excuse, which obviously would be horrible for us as well as the rest of the world with an escalation in military?
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, those are very, very important questions. The first thing I'll say is about Nanjing. You're absolutely right. Although 200,000 or 300,000 people were killed in Nanjing, literally a genocide, very, very similar to what we are seeing in Gaza right now. That was only one of multiple massacres, multiple genocides. The entire road from Shanghai to Nanjing was strewed with massacres. And immediately after Nanjing, we saw massacres in Hunan. That was probably 500,000 people, and massacre after massacre. In China, 35 million people were killed. About 10% of the Chinese population were wiped out by the Japanese in the most brutal and vicious way imaginable. And I'm talking not simply of mass slaughter, but remember also Unit 731, the medical experimentation unit that took tens of thousands of Chinese and just experimented on them until they died. Just incredible. I mean, they make Mengele look like a Boy Scout, really, the kind of atrocities that they did. And then, of course, there were the comfort women. That was 400,000 women kidnapped and turned into sex slaves and raped up to 50 or 60 times a day, according to certain reports. The death rate of a comfort woman was about 75%. That is 3 times higher than the death rate of frontline combat soldiers. That's how extraordinary that brutality and violence was. And the other piece that nobody knows about, but which is a very, very important part of the history, is the war started in China in 1931 in Manchuria, in northern China, Dongbei. And when that happened, the Japanese essentially enslaved millions of Koreans and Chinese and turned the entirety of northern China into a massive slave concentration camps and worked countless people to death. This is how Japan became powerful industrially, because it was working slaves to death in the industrial north of China. So these are all things that we don't know about. But what it does is it puts into the Chinese psyche their deep determination to never let that happen again. They're signaling to the world that we were, raped, massacred, genocided for a century, but we will never let that happen again. And that parade was part of that messaging. But also, and this is really, really important for people to understand, just as you have successor states, you have successor colonizing empire. So the Japanese empire colonized most of Asia and Southeast Asia. And after World War II, the United States took on the Japanese colony. They literally became the successor colonizing empire after Japan. That is, they turned all of Japan's colonies into US colonies. That's why Taiwan is essentially a US base. That's why South Korea is a US vassal. It was a Japanese colony. Taiwan was a Japanese colony. Now it's a US colony. Philippines is essentially a US colony. The entire Okinawan Straits, the island chain, that's the kingdom of Ryukyu, which was turned into a Japanese colony, and then now has been turned into a US colony full of US bases. Even Guam, Wake Island, even the smaller islands were Japanese colonies, and now they're lily pads for US force projection. So if you're in China and you look out at the Pacific, what you see is the United States, which has not only taken over all of Japan's colonies, but which is behaving exactly in the same way as Japan had. That is, gathering force and surrounding China, preparing to attack it. And this is even worse because we know that the worst of the Japanese colonialists, imperialists, were all rehabilitated by the United States. That's Kishi Nobusuke. He was the one who ran Manchukuo in Manchuria. He's a Class A war criminal. The US facilitated him. He became the prime minister of Japan. The man, Shiro Ishii, who ran Unit 731, the medical experimentation unit, he was rehabilitated by the United States. He went to the US and then he helped build up Fort Detrick, the US bioweapons lab, etc. So you can see there's a strong and single, coordinated historical line where the US simply rehabilitated all the Japanese war criminals, harnessed them for their own use, and then took over Japan and its former colonies, as US war bases, and then now is encroaching and surrounding China. So from China's standpoint, that war against fascism that they won 80 years ago is not finished because the Japanese have never properly made amends. And instead, what we see is a Japanese-US alliance that is replicating the aggression of the former Japanese colony. I think that's important history to place into context. Regarding the parade, there's a lot of overinterpretation. Remember, with parades, you cannot tell too much. What you're seeing are weapons. We don't know if they work. We don't know what they are. What we do know is the US didn't recognize 80% of those weapons. So whatever is going on is something new. So China is making tremendous advances in weaponry. We don't know if they're actually mock-ups or actually real weapons. We don't know that. So I think it's a little early to make large prognostications about that. But I will point out that parades are theatrical, but there is an importance to the theatricality and the pageantry, because war itself is theatrical, because that's why we talk about a theater of war, because there is a theatrical dimension to war. In any sort of combat, there is a moment before combat starts where there is a kind of theatrical posturing. And if that theatrical posturing is successful, then sometimes the other party backs down. And I think that China is using some of that. It's clearly sending a message. We are ready to fight. We are disciplined. We're ready to defend ourselves. And also, what we want is peace. The peace is really what the Chinese want. The last thing I will say about that is there parity between the militaries? That's a hard question to answer, Ken, because the Chinese military is a defensive military. It's designed to defend the Chinese homeland, whereas the US military is an expeditionary and aggressive military. So there's a kind of certain asymmetry between the two militaries. And that said, all the best indications signal that China is technologically, militarily, significantly advanced, and anything that the US tries to do will encounter tremendous difficulty, in particular because China has industrial capacity that the US doesn't have. The US has essentially deindustrialized and de-skilled over half a century. Its weapons actually rely on Chinese components and Chinese rare earths, which the Chinese are cutting off. So the US doesn't have conventional parity as far as I can tell. But that is actually not reassuring. It actually can signal more dangerous escalation. And that's the nuclear dimension, which I've alluded to. If the US feels that it cannot win a conventional war, it will escalate to nuclear. And if you read Elbridge Colby, number 3 at the Pentagon right now, this is exactly what he said. If we are losing a nuclear war, if we cannot prevail, if we cannot prevail in a conventional war, we need to go immediately nuclear. That's what he said in 2015, and he's been saying it for a decade since.
We only have maybe 6 minutes left if we're going to give Bruce a few minutes to talk at the end of this. So we have 3 people who want to speak, Alice, Tamara, and Agneta. So why don't we have sort of take the observations from each of the 3 of you, and then we'll wrap it up with KJ or Dave. Go ahead, Alice.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate KJ, because I see the big problem is Americans have no idea what happened to China. They have no idea what happened to Russia. I mean, I grew up terrified of Russia. And when I went there, I found out they lost 25 million people. And I didn't even know about China till very recently, how much you suffered at the hands of Japan. And I think that our job, I mean, those of us in the empire that are working for peace, is to educate our own people about, I'm saying it till it's ad nauseum, that China and Russia have been begging us for years to negotiate treaties to ban weapons in space, to control cyber war. I mean, they tabled them, the whole NATO expansion. I think the American people are very ignorant, and probably in England, the rest of the empire is also. Like, we're all getting this media controlled by the military that's making a killing on killing. So people are very poorly and uninformed. And I think what you just like dumped huge, wonderful information on us. I think that's our job, to figure out how to put this into baby talk and get it out there so that everybody understands that it's not the Russians, it's not the Chinese. It's like what Pogo said, we met the enemy and he is us. And we have to get that, and we have to somehow, that's our job. Because I think basically people are good, and if they know this, they're not gonna, want to kill Chinese and Russian people. They want to live in peace. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks for sharing it. Tamara?
Just really quickly, to add, KJ, to what you said about AI governance. In July, the White House released the US AI Action Plan. And if you read it, the title is Winning the Race. And then the first sentence, first paragraph is all about the US dominating AI. 2 weeks later in July, China releases its AI action plan, and it is completely different. The tone, the themes, it's talking about AI governance for cooperation, humanity, development, open access, just like you said. I mean, you compare just the first 2 paragraphs of each of these documents, and it's really so stark the difference. So I'll put links in the chat for it. The other thing that I've been telling people in terms of China is how, friends, just to think about lifting 800 million people out of extreme poverty in the past 40 years, how remarkable that is. Because in my country, in Canada, more Canadians are falling into poverty very, very seriously. The front cover of my newspaper today is more children in schools being food insecure. More Canadians are using food banks. There are tent encampments in every major city in Canada. So we are impoverishing people with our military spending, and China is lifting people out of poverty. That's something that I say. So what Alice said about trying to communicate to our communities about the positive role China plays. And the last positive thing I want to say about China is, I've been several times to the climate summits, and I've really been impressed with China's leadership on climate and environment. And that's another area that we could promote as well. So thank you so much for your important presentation. I'm so glad we all came together tonight to learn from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara. Agnita?
I want to follow Tamara. Thanks. Wonderful to listen to you. I get encouraged. I'm isolated as a peace activist. I'm really demonized in this country, Sweden, the peaceful country, which is now in NATO's pocket, or in the US pocket, actually. It's our Minister of Defense who has sold out Sweden with and promised 17 military bases when the US want to use. So there we are. But I can notice that more and more people have been, so to say, I'm not so demonized nowadays. I've been accepted in one place to speak, actually. But during the last 5 years, don't touch Agneta Norberg. She is dangerous. So there we are. You slaughter the peace movement. It's almost not existing in Sweden anymore. But we are awakening, I can say. And one more time, thank you very, very much. You are encouraging by knowledge. We are encouraging, and we can fight more efficient. Love you.
Thanks so much, everyone. I do want to say that a few people put in the chat that they would like some recommendations from books. So Dave and KJ, maybe you can pass some of that on to Bruce, and he could forward that to the community. But it would be good to get us reading more about these issues. Thank you all so much. Bruce, take us out. Oh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I want to first thank Dave and KJ for brilliant presentations. We have, with the help of our dear friend Ken Jones from North Carolina, he's recording this, and so we'll get it up on YouTube and send it out to everybody. And we ask you to spread this this Zoom meeting to your local audiences so that more people can learn. But I want to just mention briefly our next big effort, which is our annual Keep Space for Peace Week, which will be held October 4th through 11th. It's a time where we ask people to have local events, local activities, local education meetings, protests, all illuminating this plan of the United States to control and dominate not only the earth for the corporations and for capitalism, runaway capitalism, but also they want to use space technology to control the heavens and even to move off into space to control the mining in the future of various planetary bodies. They want to use space technology to control the front gate, if you will, between the Earth and these planetary bodies. So it's a dangerous time that we're living in, and it's going to cost healthcare and education and infrastructure and virtually everything that you would call social progress in not only the United States, but the NATO countries and likely Japan and South Korea and the Asia Pacific allies as well, Australia, New Zealand, etc. So we ask that during this time that you hold local events of some kind at a military installation or in front of an important government building, federal building in your community, or whatever you think can be done. And let us know what you're planning to do. We like to keep a list. And then after it's over, please send us photos or videos of your activity that we'll share through social media in our next newspaper, Space Alert. Also, I'm going to post right now in the chat. We have resources available, mostly video resources that are really wonderful. For years, we've been making short videos on every aspect of space that you can imagine. So both on our Global Network website and on our YouTube page, the Global Network YouTube page, we have a whole catalog of these videos. So please, during Space Week, maybe pick a couple of them and share them to your local email list in your community, or put it on your blog or your websites or whatever you can do. That will help, again, to take this message out beyond. So in the end, I want to thank you all for being here today. Again, I think this was a brilliant conversation, and maybe we can just ask Dave and KJ to make a closing statement before we say goodbye to everybody.
Dave?
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to KJ. I've learned such a lot tonight. Just I don't think I answered the question properly that I was given. It's quite late in the night for me here, but they asked if it made any difference if Trump was ill or if he was not here. I don't think so, because this whole process has been going on for a long time now, irrespective of who supposedly runs the country. The country is not being run really by the president, but by others. And that's where we have to watch out. We have to educate, as has already been said, and not only educate, but organize, as Bruce would say, and just try and get some sanity back into the world. But thanks, KJ. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everyone for participating and putting their time into this, and hopefully time into protesting and organizing. Thank you.
And same here, thanks to Bruce, to Dave, to all the organizers, and to all the participants. Your participation, your presence here is really, really critical. And the one thing that I want to leave you with is the importance of decolonizing your mind. Your mind is currently being seen as a domain of battle. It's literally a domain of contestation. So what we have to understand is when we think about making space peaceful, think about decolonizing your mental space, reclaim your own critical thinking, reclaim your own capacity for your own discernment, and then share your insights with others. That's how we will win this game. So this battle. So remember, the space which is closest and most proximate that we actually have a say over is our own mental space. Free your minds, as the person is saying on the chat. Reclaim mental space and continue to share, collaborate, organize, and educate others. We can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, I'm just so in so much awe of the people that are on this webinar. There's been so much shared activism. I'm so sorry that we're not sharing time and space right now and going out for a beer at a pub. It's tragic. Thank you all for a beautiful, beautiful webinar.
Thank you. Bye.